Leo, you mentioned earlier at the top of the show the framework of what's happening with real world asset tokenization. How do you guys think about that, and how are you involved in that space?
Oh, I think that's quite a tricky one. It's interestingly quite related to what we've been talking about in the ETF space in a way as well. When I think about the RWA space, so there's a lot of people putting off-chain things on-chain, right? So it's kind of the backwards direction of what we're doing with the Bitcoin ETF, where we're taking something that is strictly on-chain and taking it off-chain. Here, we're taking things that are off-chain and putting them on-chain. Similar to our conversation with spot versus futures ETFs, though, I think there's a lot of risks around that, like how you do that, how do you structure that. Um, there are there are ways in which people are putting things on chain that are very risky, that have these structural problems where it's not obvious that you have any legal bearing on the end asset. And then other ways where it's much clearer and that you get that full transparency and full access to the end product. Um, and I think while there's a proliferation of this stuff, until we get to the point where these real world assets are very competitive with things that are already off chain, I don't think they're going to become big enough to matter. So that's kind of where we have stepped in. We are very much curating our risk. I always want to say risk weighted assets when I see RWA. Um, those of us from
It is the
TradFi, yes,
world's worst acronym, by the way. And everybody who worked in
it is.
a bank thinks RWA stands for risk weighted asset, real world asset. God, why couldn't we come up with something better in the crypto
Well, it's because
space?
they were avoiding asset-backed securities, right? I call them tokenized ABS often, and then the crypto people just freak out on me. But I think tokenized ABS are going to be very important. And the question is, are you able to create a structure that is both legally sound and allows you to create a better risk return than other products? And while those assets are coming, I think a lot of people are sidestepping the entire issue and finding the easy way through, much like we did with the futures ETF. So people who are, for example, there are people who are taking securities and just directly putting them on chain, like wrapping them and putting them on chain. Literally, we're talking about putting crypto onto an ETF. There are people who take ETFs and put them into crypto, right? I think that is, it doesn't really add a whole lot of value from the investor side. So putting my chief investment officer hat on, I would never buy a tokenized ETF over a normal ETF, for example. However, I think there are other products that add a lot of value by being on chain, either because they've disintermediated some fee creators, some intermediaries, or they make everything more transparent. You can see the cash flow all the way down to the user level and see when the cash flows bubble up to the next entity and then gets tranched and then bubbles up to the security. And in a
Right.
sense, that gives you more security as well.
But it also
From the
increases
Hashnote,
the transparency of what's actually in the asset-backed security, as well as the gives you some sense of the ability to account for counterparty risk, which is, I mean, we're going back, we're dating ourselves here by going back to these 2007, 2008 era questions. But boy, tokenization could
absolutely.
really be a significant improvement.
And I think that's going to happen all around eventually. There are other places where I think tokenization can help in terms of things like speed of settlement. Ultimately, when we think about financial transactions, they're all about settlement of financial products among untrusted parties. And one place where that's super apparent is where you're posting collateral to each other. The way we currently post collateral leans heavily on the legal system. Sometimes it can be enforced, sometimes it can't. And sometimes you have no transparency, like we saw with Archegos. Like you think you have collateral, but really you have collateral, but so does everybody else in the street have the same collateral. Um, and so I think we're going to be able to do some really interesting things with. So we have a tokenized money market fund, and we think that that's really interesting as a collateral element. You can post that as collateral, and you can do so very quickly with security and be able to move that asset from posting at one place versus posting at another place very, very quickly. And that capital efficiency can do great things for the financial world. But also once again, there are a lot of dangers that can come about. I think earlier it was you who mentioned that in 07, 08, there were questions around gold ETF, right? How do you really take delivery? Do you really own that gold? And similarly, in the RWA space, we're to run into the same thing the next time another crisis comes around. People are going to be asking, hey, like, what is the structure behind this token? Can I really get at that asset? Do I ever have any bearing on that asset? So understanding the legal structure behind these is going to become super important. It's just a matter of time.